Okay, so what are we doing today? So again, we're plugging through the book. And right now we are focusing on population segments and happiness. So that's chapters 24 through 28. And this is what we're going to be talking about in the context of that part of the book, or what we call Module 5. We're going to start out talking about the well-being of children and youth. And then we'll transition to talking about quality of life issues, dealing with the elderly, and then women. And that's probably what we're not going to be able to talk about quality of life geographic population segments, because we have so much research dealing with different countries. So different countries and different world regions. But we're not going to be able to do this. And we're not going to be able to talk about, specialty population segments. I mean, we've got so much research on, for example, the disabled, on teachers, on first responders, on police, on caretakers. I mean, you name it, every kind of population segment that you can think of, we have some research on there. And in the book, I sort of touch upon some of those, but of course, I don't think I do enough justice to cover the entire gamut of research in relation to the specialty population. But nevertheless, I have good references in that chapter that you'd be able to piggyback on those, and if you're interested in a specific population, that may help you with your own research. Okay, well, let's focus on children and youth. And what we're going to be talking about is, in essence, how children's well-being is conceptualized and measured. And then we'll try and get into the theories of children's well-being, and then the factors that ultimately influence children's well-being. So let's start out with the conceptualization and the measurement of children's well-being. Now, as you can see from the slide, the best way to conceptualize children's well-being is to actually divide them in terms of those different segments, or in terms of ages. So let's say we're talking about children's well-being of preschool age, elementary school age, middle school age, adolescents, and college students. Unfortunately, we don't have hardly, at least from my own literature review, I didn't find any research dealing with infants and toddlers. And it's kind of hard to kind of measure those, the well-being of infants and toddlers. But we start out with preschool age children, and that's around the age of 5. That's around the age of 5. And it's kind of funny, because when we're talking about college students, well, college students, are they considered to be children or youth? And the answer is, well, at least in North America, going through college is sort of what you call a rites of passage. A rites of passage, meaning that you go from being a child, so to speak, to an adult. A lot of other countries, they say, wait a minute, that's too old for being treated like a child. But in North America, this is essentially the rites of passage. So you end up with the sort of, that's the borderline, the threshold in which you become an adult. You go to college and you're out of the house, so to speak, right? And therefore you go through, you're treated like an adult. Okay, well, let's start out with children of preschool age. Now, there is a specific, the best way to actually conceptualize children well-being at a sort of a preschool age level is to focus on the measure. And there's a number of measures that have been um, uh, that have become very popular in the children well-being literature. And the one that I have in the book, it's on page 553. It's called the Early Development Instrument, EDI for short. EDI for short, right? And if you look at the instrument, which is on that page, you can really get an understanding, a good feel for how you're conceptualizing children's well-being at that age. So the EDI was developed for sort of a different purpose, and that is to assess the extent to which children are ready for school. You know, in North America, as in most countries, children, they start elementary school at the age of 6, sometimes 5. But at the age of 5, somewhere between 4 and 5, this is where, in essence, this particular instrument, which is the EDI, has been focused on. So the EDI is focused on physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language, cognitive development, and communication skills, and general knowledge. So within each one of these, there are the different subdomains, like, for example, in physical health and well-being, physical readiness for school. And it is captured by a specific item. Now, this item, or the measures, the very specific items in that measure are not responded to by the child as a respondent, but by teachers. So teachers fill out these inventories, right? So again, those ratings are made by teachers. So one question would be, arrives at school hungry. So that is an indication of that person, that child is not necessarily physically ready for school. Physical independence, has well-coordinated movements. Okay, that's pretty good. That means he's ready for elementary school. Gross and fine motor skills, is able to manipulate objects, right? Again, that signals the ability for readiness for elementary school. Things like social competence. Social competence is divided in terms of overall social competence, responsibility and respect, approaches to learning, and readiness to explore new things. And there are some very specific, again, items in relation to those, like, for example, responsibility and respect would be accepts responsibility for actions. Again, that would signal readiness for school. But again, although the purpose of this measure was designed to assess school readiness, it is used to assess the emotional, cognitive, and social well-being of the child. So on and on. So if you look at that measure on page 553, you can really get an understanding of how children's well-being at that age, at the age of 4 and 5, can be assessed, and it is assessed again by children well-being researchers. If we move on to talking about children well-being at the elementary school age, and the elementary school age is somewhere between 5 and 11. 5 and 11, that would be the age where we talk about children are in elementary school. Now, in North America, after elementary school, we talk about middle school and high school. In most other countries, you talk about secondary schools. So again, it's a finer distinction in North America that is made by breaking down secondary school in terms of, again, what we call middle school, and high school. So when it comes to elementary school, there is a specific measure that is becoming increasingly popular in the well-being literature, which is called the Child Quality of Life Systemic Inventory. In French, it's Inventaire systémique de qualité de vie enfant. So the idea of that measure is that you get the child and you try and interview the child by trying to understand and capture the gap between actual states and desired states in different domains. And then what they do is they also capture the perceived importance of these domains. Now, what are the domains that are most important for children in elementary school, for example? There are 20 domains based on this measure. And as you can see that, the children well-being is nothing more than a domain satisfaction kind of a composite. So you're thinking if I would be able to tap into how the child is satisfied in those domains that are very important to them, then you get a composite index of satisfaction in those domains, then voila, you'd be able to capture the well-being of the child at that age. So what are those 20 domains? Sleep, food, pain, health, clothes, physical appearance, bedroom, relations with grandparents, relations with mother, relations with father, relations with siblings, relations with friends, opinion of people around me have about me, school results, sport activities, extracurriculum activities, autonomy, obedience to authority, and tolerance of frustration. So these are the 20 domains that are captured. So in essence, what the researcher does is try to ask the child, how happy are you now in relation to, let's say, sleep, food, health, and so forth, right? Vis-a-vis the ideal state. And the ideal state, where should you be situated? Where would be situated to be satisfied in relation to food, in relation to health, and so forth? So what the researcher does is capture the gap between the actual state and the ideal state, right, across these 20 domains, and come up with some sort of a composite index. And those satisfaction scores are further weighted by the perceived importance of those domains. So again, the researcher gets sort of an understanding of how important is, for example, sleeping or wearing clothes or physical appearance is to the child, and then would rank order those domains, and then that comes up with some sort of a weighting, a weighted average or weighted summative score. So that's how it's done in the context of elementary school or elementary school children. And again, we're talking about those who are between the ages of 5 and 11. Now we move on to middle age school, and the middle age school, they vary between 10 and 14 years old. So again, children who are 10 to 14 years old. And there is one particular measure that has gained quite a bit of popularity in the well-being children well-being research, which is called the multidimensional students' life satisfaction scale. Again, let me repeat it: the multidimensional student life satisfaction scale. There is a team of researchers, one of the the primary researcher in this area is by the name of Professor Hubner. Anyway, so this particular measure capture, again, most of those measures focus on what you call domain satisfaction. And you know the concept of domain satisfaction that is so important in the well-being literature. So we're looking at 5 key domains that are relevant to middle school children. And these are family. So we're talking about family life, friendship, school life, self, and the living environment. And I have a table on page 555, and it breaks it down in terms of family, friends, school, self, and living environment. Let me give you a sort of an idea of some of those items in relation to, again, those domains. So when it comes to family, you ask the child whether he or she would disagree with a statement like, "My family is better than most." My parents treat me fairly, right? So these are examples of items in terms of family life, and that would capture, satisfaction in family life. How about friends? My friends are great. My friends are nice to me. I have a lot of fun with my friends. My friends will help me if I need them, that kind of thing. Again, that's, social life, or what you call friendship. School life. I like being in school. I look forward to going to school. School is interesting. I enjoy school activities. Again, example of items that are involved in capturing satisfaction in school life. Self. I think I'm good looking. I'm fun to be around. Most people like me. I like to try new things. Again, self. Living environment would be things like, I like where I live. I wish I lived in a different, I wish I lived in a different house. That would be what you call reverse scored. That means it's the opposite. I like my neighborhood and the like. So again, this is an example of domain satisfaction measure, and it's very popular, and it captures life satisfaction for what you call middle school age kids, ages between 10 to 14. Now, then we get into adolescence. Adolescents, in essence, are what you call teenagers. So teenagers, what are the teens? Teenagers are between the age of 13 to 19, right? The teen years. And there is, again, a very popular measure that captures the well-being of adolescents is essentially propagated by what you call the Personal Well-being Index School Children Measure. Robert Cummings from Deakin University has been a sort of the proponent of this particular measure, and this measure has been very well validated in that context. So again, the focus on domains. What are those domains for teenagers that are most interested in, or they think it's most important to their own lives? It would be things like standard of living, health, achieving, relationship, safety, community, future, and school. So these are the domains that are very important for teenagers, and the idea is to capture, again, domain satisfaction in relation to those, and you end up with a composite index, and voila, you end up with a good measure of children well-being at that age, or within that age range. Then we have college students. Again, we talk about college students. College students, it's kind of interesting that when we deal with the kind of research on children well-being in North America. College students, as I mentioned, they go through that rites of passage, and they're considered to be part of this big umbrella of research on children and youth. And there's a number of measures, but one of the popular measures is by Professor Mikolos from University of Northern British Columbia. And his measure, again, became very popular. And the idea is, how do you measure quality of life for college students? And again, it focuses so much on different domains. The kind of domains that are important for college students are not necessarily the same kind of domains that are that are important for other children in other age brackets. So what are those domains? The domains would be housing, family relations, friendships, recreation, financial security, self-esteem, instructors, course offerings, student services, library services, food services, fitness services, bookstore services, academic preparation for employment. These are the domains that are important for college students. And therefore, if you get a measure of satisfaction in those domains and you end up with a composite index, you end up with a good measure of well-being for college students. Okay, I see that we have 2 questions in the chat box. From Azen. Does anyone have any questions or action items? Let's capture them in the meeting notes. I'm not even sure where the meeting notes are. But if you can, yeah, that'd be great. Yes. And the meeting notes, and that is, you scroll back to review anything that you missed. So there is a link that Azen provided us. So that's good. Thank you, Azen. Am I pronouncing your name right? Azen? So let's not try to understand some of the theories, or what you might call the mediating mechanisms that helps us understand children's well-being. And there are 3 popular theories in the children well-being psychology literature. One is social development theory. The other one is attachment theory. And the third one is ecological theory. Now, what is social development theory? Social development theory is very much based on Erik Erikson's work in psychology. There's, as you know, in psychology, there's a whole field, not field, actually a discipline of study that focuses on developmental psychology. And in developmental psychologists study children. And of course, they study people divided in terms of the lifespan. But most of their work seems to focus on children and youth, as well as the elderly. So much of that research, for example, the elderly, there's a whole cadre of researchers, we call them gerontologists, and they do much of that research. But when it comes to children, again, the social development theory by Erik Erikson has been used quite often. And the idea, in psychology, especially in developmental psychology, there are many theories. Like, for example, Abraham Maslow's theory is what you call a stage theory. So, he talks about how people progress in terms of developing, in terms of satisfying different needs at different stages. So you become fixated at a certain stage, at a lower stage of development, and you have a hard time climbing up the ladder to the higher stages. Well, Eric Erickson talks about, again, um, stages in children's development. You know, for example, 1 to 3 years old, they may be fixated at a stage if they don't meet the challenges of that stage. So between 1 and 3 years old, you know, the child has to struggle with what we call autonomy. The child tries to be as independent as possible from the caretaker, and struggling with that and failing to do so, you know, would get the child fixated on autonomy kinds of issues. It tries to break away and become somewhat independent, and not being able to do so creates quite a bit of anxiety that stays with the child throughout the different, you know, the maturity stages. And so that's between the ages of 1 and 3, against the whole idea of being challenged by autonomy or independence kinds of issues. Between the ages of 3 and 5, again, these are preschool children, and they struggle with what? They struggle with cooperating and playing with other children. And if they don't find, if they're constantly failing to cooperate and play nicely with other children, then that turns to a big challenge, which creates undue anxiety that again stays with them throughout the years. School age children, you know, between 6 and adolescence, for example, are faced with the challenge of demonstrating academic performance, academic competence. So if they don't do well at school, that kind of stays with them. It creates undue anxiety. And again, it stays with them throughout. So that's the idea. The idea is we need to focus on the different stages and what are the challenges related to those stages, and ultimately the extent to which those challenges are met, then the child can travel up the ladder, so to speak, and climb up the ladder to the next stage without undue anxiety. Basic anxiety kind of keeps the child fixated at that stage, and then, you know, the child would have a hard time climbing up the ladder, so to speak. The next stage, no questions? The next stage is attachment theory. Attachment theory, we already talked about attachment theory, and again, psychologists have worked with attachment theory, especially in the context of families, especially in the context of children, and also with animal research. Attachment theory has been very popular and used prominently. Attachment theory deals with especially the caretaker. So we have a child being taken care of, mostly the mother, traditionally speaking. That is not to say that, again, there are many exceptions and there are a lot of outliers out there. You know, children are raised by all kinds of caretakers, fathers and babysitters and you know, relatives, uncles, aunts, and what have you. So the idea of the caretaker, the extent to which the child feels attached to the caretaker makes a whole lot of difference in the child's well-being. So it generates issues dealing with security and insecurity that translates into anxiety as well as avoidance. So, you know, if the child does not bond does not become emotionally attached to the caretaker early on, then it really generates into issues of abandonment, anxiety related to abandonment, anxiety related to separation, anxiety related to interpersonal relationships of all kinds, And much of that anxiety, again, stays with the individual. So you know, for example, you know, attachment theory says that people who have a problem with romantic relationships, with marriage, for example, that is an anxiety that stems from early childhood, dealing with, again, the social bonding that takes place between the child and the caretaker, especially the mother, well, traditionally the mother. So again, we're dealing with avoidance and anxiety issues that stays with the child into adulthood as a function of these types of the anxiety and the avoidance types of issues that reflects attachment to the caretaker. That's a very fundamental theory that is used by a lot of well-being researchers dealing with children and, well, dealing with developmental issues. Ecological theory talks about the interaction between the person and the personality associated with the personal baggage that the person brings into a situation and the situation itself. So we're talking about the person environment fit type of thing, and the interaction that occurs with, you know, in that context. So let's say Daniel Sheck, for example, who is a researcher that has done plenty of research in this area, embraces the notion of ecology, social ecology, in the context of family functioning, So the child, well, more specifically, the youth, the adolescent, brings in you know, a bunch of personal baggage that deals with personal characteristics and personality and self-concept. And Daniel Sheck talks about how these are in terms of resilience, for example, psychological competencies, self-determination, self-efficacy, positive identity, optimism, pro-social proclivities. This is what you call the personal baggage that the person brings into the situation, and the situation is within the family, and then he talks about the interaction between family functioning and those personal attributes. So we're talking about, again, the person environment fit, and the idea is that, you know, those characteristics that fit, you know, certain aspects of family function are the things that, you know, lead to higher levels of children well-being, not children, youth well-being in this instance. So again, you know, some of that research that comes from this line of research seems to be very, very promising. Now we're going to focus on the factors that influence children well-being, children and youth well-being. And there's so many studies out there, you know, focusing on in this area. So we break things down in terms of situational factors, personality factors, demographic factors, psychographic factors, social factors, and socioeconomic and sociocultural factors. So let's again discuss those. Oops. I'm looking at the chat room to see if anyone has any questions. So let's focus on situational factors. Eustress. Yeah, this is a term that you're probably not familiar with. Eustress is, psychologists they break down the concept of stress in terms of what you call functional stress and dysfunctional stress. Dysfunctional stress is the kind of stress that is chronic. So if you experience stress over the long term, that really feeds into psychopathology, as for example, neuroticism. So that's dysfunctional stress, which is chronic stress. If you're experiencing stress over a long period of time, then it turns into, it has certain what you call psychopathological ramifications, right? But there is functional stress. As a matter of fact, you can't function, you can't do anything in life without a certain degree of stress, because stress is nothing more than a motivational component. You need to kind of feel a little excited, a little motivated, a little stressed out in order to accomplish certain things, in order to get yourself motivated to do stuff. That's what we call functional stress. And that's eustress. Now, in the context of children, the excitement, the exuberance that children manifest in different situations is essentially eustress. If they become excited, they become interested in, for example, schoolwork. Well, that's good. And that, of course, plays a role in children's well-being. It feeds into well-being. It contributes to well-being. Another situational factor that is so important and very profoundly important in the minds of children is social recognition. For the caretaker, for the parents, for the people around the child to recognize the individuality of that child. I am here, look at me, pay attention. Children are always seeking attention from their parents and their siblings and from their friends and so forth. And if they don't get that recognition, that social recognition, then that takes a toll on children's well-being. So social recognition, situationally induced, becomes a very important factor in children's well-being. Social support. Again, if children don't have social support, especially when they get into trouble. So if they get into trouble and they do something wrong, and inevitably and invariably they will, children do get themselves in trouble because they don't know, what are the social norms, and they're always learning, right? So if they get into trouble and they don't get the social support from their parents, from their siblings, from their relatives, from their friends, then again, it takes a toll on their well-being, right? So social support is very important. Sometimes parents, try to discipline their children, and their idea is that when they do something wrong, they crack that whip, they discipline their child through punishment, and reward and punishment can work in certain ways, but social support couched in terms of reinforcement or rewards is much better than punishment and discipline. Social support has been documented and demonstrated through much research as definitely contributing to the children's well-being, and the deprivation, the lack of social support, takes away from children's well-being. There are a series of studies dealing with hope intervention. So let's say in positive psychology, there's a whole program research dealing with interventions. So there's hope intervention, there is gratitude intervention, there is mindfulness intervention, there's forgiveness, loving kindness intervention, on and on. There's all kinds of interventions that are designed to engage in certain positive activities, ultimately leading to contributing to positive affect, and the positive affect or those positive feelings contribute to subjective well-being, which is definitely a good thing. But there's, in the context of children's well-being, apparently one of those positive psychology intervention is what we call hope intervention. And that seems to be, again, very significant in developing hope and optimism for the child. So children always dream, and they have hopes, and they have aspirations. Sometimes, of course, those aspirations may not be realistic. But nevertheless, this sense of hope and optimism is so important, much more important for children than adults, because it gives them a sense of optimism to feel motivated to do things and to climb up the ladder, so to speak, in every walk of life. So a hope intervention, again, has been documented to play a very important role in children's well-being. Personality factors. Now, we break personality factors into terms of positive traits and negative traits. And what are those positive traits that contribute to children's well-being? It would be sense of coherence. Sense of coherence. What is sense of coherence? Sense of coherence is that you know yourself. You know, you have a coherent sense of meaning about yourself and about the world around you. So it involves comprehension, it involves meaningfulness, and it involves manageability. Based on your understanding of how the world works, you manage the world. That's a sense of coherence. So children that have a greater sense of coherence tend to have a greater sense of well-being because they manage to interact with the world around them in a positive way, in a manageable way, in an effective way. Optimism is very much like hope. Again, it's very important for children, especially for children, to be optimistic, because that gives them a sense of motivation to do things, to accomplish things. Self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the extent to which you feel that you can effect efficacy. Comes from effectance, motivation. That is, you feel like you can effect the environment. You can change the environment around you. Otherwise, you feel hopeless. Otherwise, you feel helpless. Hopeless and helpless are essentially the opposite of self-efficacy. So for children to feel self-efficacious, that's the term we use, then it leads to, again, the sense of well-being. Mastery. Mastery is very much a parallel construct to self-efficacy. Mastery, again, focuses on very specific skills. So the children tries to learn how to master certain games, being playful, for example. I sit together with my grandson, for example. His name is Scott, and we play all kinds of games. He loves to win. He loves to master the game. And if he doesn't master, he feels very frustrated, very flustered. And I try and tell him, hey, be a sport now. And winning is not all, is not everything. And you need to be a sport about, well, when you lose, of course, you accept. But nevertheless, children love to master, playful activities. And ultimately that provides them a basis, a foundation for adult competencies and skills. Social potency. Social potency is actually a construct that is loaded with meaning. Let me give you a good definition of social potency. I'm looking at page 562. Social potency refers to novelty, diversity, divergent thinking, leadership, extroversion, and enterprise. Talk about loaded. So again, social potency. So it is the idea that, again, the person is interacting with the environment in the social arena, being very enterprising, being very creative, approaching novelty, seeking novelty, divergent thinking. Divergent thinking is a concept that comes from the psychology of creativity. So how to be creative and understanding creativity. Psychologists talk about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. So divergent thinking is to be able to come up with all kinds of alternative solutions. And convergent thinking is to try and assess all these optional solutions and try and figure out exactly which one fits the bill, so to speak, which one that is likely to be most effective. So once you flesh out all the different possible solutions, that's divergent thinking. Convergent thinking gets you to evaluate those different optional solutions and select the most effective one. So social potency, again, is a characteristic, is a personal characteristic that contributes to the children's well-being in that sense. Dependability, the extent to which the child is dependable. So when the parent expects the child to do something, counts on the child to do a chore, for example, a house chore, and the child does not follow through, that kind of creates a problem. Well, actually, all kinds of problems in terms of what you call family functioning. But a child that is dependable, that the parent counts on him or her to carry through those chores, delegated chores, then that contributes to the child's well-being, because ultimately dependability leads to recognition, leads to rewards of all kinds within the family, and it enhances also family functioning. Interpersonal relatedness. You remember we talked about relatedness in the past. And here we're talking about making social connections, establishing relationships that are of high quality. So again, interpersonal relatedness between the child and the parents, the child and the relatives, the child and the siblings, the child and his or her friends. Again, that makes quite a bit of difference in terms of, again, contributing to the child's well-being. Identity firmness. Identity firmness. This is a concept that is very much akin to sense of coherence. But identity firmness is the extent to which the child knows who he is, who or she is, right? So the child knows that I have certain skills. The child knows that he or she is lovable, for example, that he or she is competent in doing certain chores. The strength of knowing who I am in terms of one's identity makes quite a difference. So children who have a firm identity, that firmness in terms of construing one's identity contributes to the child's well-being. Because again, ultimately, understanding oneself contributes to functioning. You function better in the world, especially in the context of family. You contribute to family functioning more effectively with identity firmness. Another one is dispositional gratitude. So there is a difference between what you call situational gratitude and dispositional gratitude. Situational gratitude is that when the situation arises, you express gratitude. You say thank you, right? Because somebody did something, a good deed, and you express gratitude for that good deed. But dispositional gratitude is personality. It stays with you. That means you, irrespective of the situation, you feel blessed, you feel thankful for a whole lot of things. You're thankful to be alive. You're thankful of your family. You're thankful for living in the neighborhood that you're in. You're thankful for your brothers and sisters. You're thankful for your parents, on and on. That's dispositional. If you have that kind of personality, meaning dispositional gratitude, that again contributes significantly to the children's well-being. Resilience, as we know, resilience is being able to bounce back from adversity. So when you encounter an adverse event, being able to learn from it and grow as a function of this adversity. You grow and learn from adversity, and that makes you resilient. So children that when they encounter a negative situation, and instead of allowing the negative situation to tear them to pieces, so to speak, they learn from it, they grow, and they become better children, better person. That's resilience. Character strength. Character strength is that people have different strength in terms of their own character. Some people appreciate beauty. Some people are good in terms of being sociable and creating social bonds. Other people that are good in terms of their own intellect. So, people have different character strength, and the extent to which they use these strengths in certain kinds of situations. Again, we're talking about person, environment fit. If they would be able to use those strengths in certain kinds of situations that ultimately lead to rewards, then again, these character strengths work well in terms of contributing to their well-being. The negative traits are pretty obvious. Depression, social stress, and neuroticism. Social stress would be, again, the kind of anxiety that people feel, around other people. Depression, of course, that's pretty obvious. But frankly, I every time I see depression as an independent variable, I become a little bit suspicious. Well, not suspicious, a little leery in the sense that, hey, wait a minute, depression predicting well-being? Well, depression is the opposite of well-being. That's ill-being. So, there's a confounding effect there. But nevertheless, you see depression as used as a personality trait, and it's definitely a negative trait. Neuroticism is, as you know, we already talked about neuroticism. And, certain people being neurotic, they see things in a negative light. Hit the wrong button. Oops. Actually, I need to. Sorry about that. Okay, now we're back, right? You can see it. Okay, it's on 11 o'clock, and this is probably a good break. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back and finish this, and then we'll start talking about the elderly. Okay, 10 minutes. See you shortly. Okay, I guess we let's reconvene, and we're talking about demographic factors now, and the two studies have shown that there may be an effect, an age effect, a gender effect, and the age effect is somewhere between 10 and 16 years old, that children's well-being kind of diminish. You know, children's well-being plummets for some reason. Now, what's the explanation for that? Well, based on the research, the explanation is that, well, actually, there are two explanations. One is it has something to do with optimism. Children, the younger kids tend to be very optimistic. They tend to be very idealistic in the way they aspire to do things and accomplish things. The older they get, the more they get is what you call a dose of reality, a reality check. They become less optimistic, and that's dampening effect of optimism. It may explain the dampening of children's well-being at that age, between the ages of 10 and 16. The other explanation is that the ages between 10 and 16, again, the dampening effect may be accounted for or explained by increasing role demand. So as the child ages, then the parents would delegate a whole bunch of other responsibilities, from house chores. You take care of your brothers or sisters. You go to the grocery store, and you're supposed to do this and that, on and on. So there's a whole bunch of, but of course, besides schoolwork and other kinds of responsibility. So there is what you might call increasing role demand that may account for the diminishing effect on well-being. So these are the sort of the two explanations that you find in the literature. When it comes to sex, meaning gender, a meta-analysis is a study of a whole bunch of studies and documenting the effect size of those different studies, has shown that there is a slight advantage of male over females, children. And frankly, looking at that research and looking at the meta-analysis myself, there's no good explanation for that. Maybe I should just ask you, why do you think that male children have a slight advantage over females or girls? What's your explanation of that? Can you come up with an explanation? Let's explore that for a few minutes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so someone else wanted to go there. I'll let the lady go first.
Sure. Who?
Okay, so I'm coming from India, and I noticed that, there is definitely a bias towards male children, the effects of patriarchy.
Oh.
And they are often given advantage in, little things like what they can eat, what they can do, maybe just go around cycling or something like that. So they definitely get things much more than the girls do.
Aha. A sense of boy privilege. Is that what it is? A boy privilege? Same thing with China, I guess. You know, culturally speaking, they value boys more than girls. So is that what you're alluding to?
Yes,
That
that absolutely yes.
Mhm.
So that's why when I read this, I was like, yeah, of course, makes sense.
okay. Other explanations?
Yeah, I actually attribute it to epigenetics. Now, I mean, we've been so far along now. Thousands of years of male domination have basically put, you know, you see it in some cultures still. I mean, the boy is given, you know, the boy can climb a tree, the girl is thrown a doll. I mean, they're very much separated, and this is throughout history. And believe me, I have three powerful women in my life, and I'm behind them. I support them. I love it. If we had, my personal belief is if we had more women leaders, we wouldn't be in the situation we are in today in some areas.
Absolutely.
I think they come from an intuitive, empathetic, compassionate mindset and heart. And
Much
this
better
is
than
basically what we need. And this is, I think but back to your question, it's because for thousands of years, men have been in charge of things, you know. Time for a change, really,
yeah.
in that area.
Interesting thought.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so there you have it. Psychographic factors. Again, the research can be divided, can be broken down in terms of positive psychographics and negative psychographics. Religiosity and spiritual well-being. Those children that are into or much more religious, you know, children that, for example, that go to church or go to mosque, or go to the temples and so forth, and engage in religious activities, tend to have, remember the stuff that we talked about in terms of sense of coherence, you know, religion gives them this sense of coherence, and same thing with spirituality. So again, spirituality is the sort of the bigger umbrella. So at least this is my interpretation of the study findings. Physical exercise. Physical exercise have been documented to play a role in children's well-being. Children that sit on their butts, you know, they do nothing. They're very inactive, physically inactive. They don't get the endorphin effect of the exercise. Physical exercise generate endorphins that, at least from a physiological point of view, it plays a role in well-being and subjective well-being. Ecological responsible behavior. Ecological responsible behavior would be like, you know, children that don't litter. They when they wake up in the morning, they make up their beds. They engage in house chores related to cleaning and maintenance and that kind of thing. They recycle. On and on. Ecological responsible behavior, again, have been shown to contribute to children's well-being. And I think it has something to do with conscientiousness. Engaging in this kind of behavior, again, leads to, well, maybe a reflection of conscientiousness. Children who are conscientious, and conscientiousness, as we know, is a personality trait that contributes to well-being. Free time management. Now, this is kind of interesting. I have a table in the book that deals with that. How children manage their free time. If they manage their free time well, then that really contributes to their well-being. On page 567, I have a measure of free time management that breaks things down in terms of goal setting and evaluating, how you set goals for free time, how you make lists of things to do in free time, how you set priorities for free time, and the techniques that would allow you to, again, use your free time as you organize free time daily or weekly. You collect information related to leisure pursuits. You plan your leisure and your free time attitudes. Free time is meaningful. Free time is happy. Free time is important. And the way you schedule things, so again, this whole umbrella, this whole enchilada, so to speak, related to free time management, again, plays an important role in children's well-being. Children who don't manage their free time well, what do? They sit around and play video games. Well, if you plan to play video game, that's good. But if you just in a vegetative way, you play video game just to pass time without necessarily having to plan to play a video game with your friends, right? Then again, that would be an example of that. Any comments, questions, observations? Nope. Okay. What do we have? We have other things like values. Children have values. They value certain things. For example, if they value friendship, and if they place so much value on friendship and loyalty, then if there are situations that, again, would enhance friendship and loyalty, that contributes to their well-being. So again, things that happen in the environment that are congruent with their value and value system, that contributes to their well-being. The negative psychographics are pretty obvious. Image popularity, those children that are hung up on their image and how they should be popular, and if they're not popular enough, and again, that contributes to their negative affect. Abnormal dieting, well, that's obvious. If you engage in things like anorexia and bulimic behaviors, now that of course would spiral into all kinds of negative stuff that would take a toll on children's well-being. Sexual risk-taking behaviors, obviously, and you end up doing that, then it affects your self-esteem and so forth, especially for girls. And of course, then there's the onset of STD, sexually transmitted disease. Then you have substance abuse. And again, all host of problems related, substance abuse, from addiction to all the social ramifications associated with that. Then we have, wow, that's a long list. Social factors, again, social factors, got positive factors and negative factors, and things like social interest and participation in extracurricular activities. That's pretty obvious. Kids that participate in extracurricular activities, they tend to kind of get a boost of positive energy, positive emotions. Owning meaningful social roles. That's something. Let's say, for example, in the context of family function, if the parents does not delegate any kind of responsibility to the child, that's not necessarily a good thing for the child's well-being. But if a child is delegated certain roles, meaningful roles, not the kind of roles that they can sink their teeth in, the kind of roles that they find meaningful. Let's say, for example, if you have a girl who loves to take care of her dolls and loves to play with her dolls to the point where it that the parent would delegate her to take care of her maybe younger sibling. And she finds this role to be particularly meaningful. Or a boy who would, whatever the roles are, if the whole idea is that if these roles that are assigned to the children are meaningful to the children themselves, then they, whatever reward that comes out of those role enactments are likely to contribute to well-being, much more so than if the child is delegated roles that are not meaningful to them, right? Help cook in the kitchen. Let's, set up the table. And the child doesn't think that this is a meaningful role, and the child is feeling like he or she is coerced into it. That's not going to contribute to their well-being, right? So assigning and delegating certain roles that are meaningful to the children, is the catch. Quality and quantity of interpersonal relationships, that's pretty obvious. The idea is that children, the most important thing, especially when they reach adolescence, the most important thing in their lives is friends, right? Friendships, and therefore interpersonal relations, the quantity as well as the quality of positive relationships with friends, especially friends, makes a whole lot of difference in terms of their well-being. So that's pretty obvious. And again, there's a lot of studies showing that. Development asset is a loaded concept. I'm on page 569, and it is defined in the way the researchers have defined it: support by parents and other adults. Again, support by parents and other adults, accountability to adults, empowerment, school support, values regarding risk behaviors, quantity of other adult support, and empathetic relationships. Whew. That is a loaded concept. Development assets, they call it. So a combination, a mix of all of these characteristics, children who encounter those things and have those things, ultimately they would have a greater sense of well-being. Developmental assets. Positive social relationships, that's pretty obvious. Social bonding, I'm running out of time. We talked about owning meaningful social roles, intimate social relationships formed in early childhood, pro-social motivation and behavior. Pro-social motivation and behavior is that when the child does altruistic things, help others, for example, volunteer to do things on their own rather than being coerced to doing so. Multiple close relationships, again, that's obvious. Family structure. Now, what is family structure? Family structure, again, based on the research, focuses on the sort of the traditional family. You've got the mother, the father, right? And you have the children. That would be a traditional family structure. The alternative family structure would be, having a family headed by a single parent, or by a widow, or by a divorcee, right? These are what you call the alternative family structure. And again, much of the research indicate very clearly is that children that are raised in what you call traditional family structures, such as, again, a mother, father, and with their children, are much better off in terms of their own well-being than in these what you call alternative family structures. But I think things are changing. Things are changing a lot lately, so one needs to keep track of these trends. Negative factors would be, again, some of them are pretty obvious. The distress that the parents go through, that spills over and onto their children, and it affects their well-being. Living with other people besides one parents, like for example, orphans, bad, really affects their well-being. Parental mistrust and alienation. If the parents don't trust their own kids, that really takes a toll on their well-being. Delinquency, lack of maternal care, they're pretty self-explanatory, right? And some of the socioeconomic factors are also pretty obvious, as an income, family affluence, neighborhood resources, neighborhood characterized as low environmental quality, effective acculturation strategy. Effective acculturation, that applies to only immigrants that move to another country, another place, and they become acculturated, meaning how they fit in. If they fit in well, then that really contributes to their well-being. If they are treated like outcasts, then of course that really affects their well-being. So that's what we're talking about in terms of effective acculturation strategy, and that is the coping strategy that children use to fit in. Let's say, for example, learning the language proficiently. That would be an example of an acculturation strategy. Okay. That's children and youth and the psychology of well-being related to that population segment. Next time, we're going to try and tackle the elderly. I'm going to try and go faster next time. Again, there's so much to talk about. And it would be kind of nice that we'd be able to talk, interact a little bit more. But again, the time is very limited. Nevertheless, we'll see what we can do. Okay, I'm gonna try and send you the exam questions, and next Tuesday when we get together, we'll tackle the elderly, and then we'll tackle women, the psychology of the psychology of well-being of women too. That's equally exciting. Okay, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next week. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.